Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, and happy Mock Draft Monday to everybody. No St. Paddy's Day this week, Sam, but we're always celebrating on Mondays here leading up to the draft with mock drafts, reviewing mock drafts, and today we review the Godfather's mock draft, Mel Kiper Jr., the Godfather of all NFL draft media, draft content. We're going to go through Mel's recent mock. Sam, how you doing, man?
Finally did it. Finally got to a Mel mock. The timing had been off. He kept releasing them at silly times, weeks before we were doing things. But now we have a relatively, topical Mel Kiper draft.
Yeah, and as always, I think when Mel drops his mocks and Daniel Jeremiah, the people that are more plugged in, right? They do it differently than you and I, maybe. You and I, it's very much, hey, here, let's play GM. And I think they're doing a little bit of that, but they're doing a lot more. Let's be predictive. Let's go. What are we hearing, and ear to the streets. And so you get more information about maybe what's happening around the league when Mel drops his mock drafts.
Yeah, though. So it's interesting because Jeremiah is like obviously a former team scout, pretty plugged in with the league. He goes to all these events because he's doing, the NFL media stuff. And, I can imagine Jeremiah having a fairly extensive contact list from within NFL buildings. Have you ever seen Kiper at anything? Like, have you ever actually seen him at a thing like the combine or whatever, in person, face to face, even if you didn't meet the man? Like, what do you reckon Kiper's contact book looks like?
I bet it's pretty strong, but it's a lot of phone calls. And I also imagine because he's not on the road as much, the scouts that have now become general managers over the last few years, he might have fewer of those contacts. A guy like DJ probably has more, when Joe Douglas was the GM, that was like they're the similar age or whatever, like came up together and, his peers are becoming general managers. But I assume Mel still has plenty of contacts around the league, and he does mostly that, right? Talking on the phone.
Yeah, but what was interesting about him is sort of way back in the day when he like created this whole industry, the kind of the mock draft complex. It was all his own stuff, right? It was like, here's what I think. Like, I've looked at the tape on these guys. I think this GM is an idiot if he drafts this guy. And that was like his style, right? It's like, based off me watching the tape, I believe this team is dumb if they do this. And that was like, everyone loved that, right? That was controversial. That was how he got traction. I do want, and obviously he, like, as the years go on, it's been more and more, here's what I'm hearing in the league. But I wonder how, like, I think of all the people, his is probably still maybe the most personal I've watched take relative to other, big kind of mock draft people.
I think they all kind of go through that cycle, though, right? That was why I thought Mayock was refreshing for quite a while. Mayock came in with his unique takes,
yeah,
and he didn't care for a while. And then there was points where you saw even Mike, make a draft week change, like, oh, this guy's jumping up into my top 5 because I heard he's going in the first round.
Well, he got totally like subsumed by the TV deal. Like, he got that. So that was the first sign of it happening. It's like, oh, look, he was really, really bad at like telegraphing. Here's something somebody's just told me that changes everything, right? So he would do it on the mocks like the week before the draft. But he was also the guy that was awful at telegraphing tipping picks, live on the broadcast. Like, oh, maybe it's actually a cornerback after spending 5 minutes talking about defensive tackles. And then he just got spread too thin. It's like, okay, now Mike's just, the information's bad as well. Like, he doesn't have time to dive into all this.
We'd love to get Mike on the show at some point, by the way. I know last year we did our retro mock draft or draft review. We went back and watched the 2011 draft. I enjoy those types of shows. You guys have seen me on Twitter going back and retweeting the 1998 draft, the 2004 draft. I want to continue to do some of that. I would love to get Mayock on a show reviewing a draft that he was a part of, 2010 or 15 or whatever it was, or a Raiders draft that he was really a part of in the draft room. So see what we could do at some point there. So don't piss too many people off here, Sam.
I'm just saying, I love Mike. At the start of his TV kind of doing the stuff, I thought he was the best person out there.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I thought NFL Network did a really nice job and brought a legitimate competitor to ESPN. Now they might all be, in cahoots with ESPN talking about buying NFL Network and NFL media. So that's something to keep an eye on. Let's we've got great feedback from the people on Mug Talk. I'm going back with Old Faithful here. I got my Sport Radar Yeti mug.
One person?
No, it's multiple. It's multiple. We check the mug is what people are saying in the comments. People love it. They're commenting on every video. They want us to ask every guest what
that I did see that. That was kind of funny.
We could make that a thing. So have you mixed it up yet today? Or are you going with your Old Faithful?
So I've had the wine glass for a while, but I've gone back to my official favorite mug, the free one that I got from Mint Mobile when we got a sponsorship with them at one point.
Nice.
This is my favorite mug. It's perfect.
You begging for Mint Mobile sponsorships to come back here?
I mean, I don't care if we get the sponsorship. I'd settle for like 8 more of these mugs. Like if they just have a bunch of them sitting around that they didn't get rid of, I'd take them all.
I do know we have Sport Radar people that listen to us. If you want to fire over some more of your custom Yetis, I will gladly continue to endorse the Sport Radar Yeti mug that I stole from PFF offices 5 years ago this month during COVID. I took home and just never returned.
I was going to say, is there like a statute of limitations on that?
I don't know. I hope they don't come tracking it down. But anyway, let's get into Mel Kiper's mock draft. Of course, it's over at ESPN.com. It's all paywalled, but we're gonna go through it. Let's start at the top. It is getting to be very consistent here that Cam Ward is going to the Titans. About a little bit before the combine, we had some creativity at the top. We had quotes coming out of Tennessee that, hey, if there's a generational player, we're not going to pass that guy up. Turns out those comments were, they were generic anyway, but people ran with them, right? We talked about people had Abdul Carter, like this is the generational guy.
You ran with them.
Oh, I run with everything. Yeah, easy. I mean, if you are, look, I know GMs listen to us, some of them on double speed. If you have some information that you want to get out there, I'll endorse
Carry that water.
Oh, I will. We hate on the insiders for carrying the water of the agents. Maybe they're little puppets for the agents that copy and paste the agents' own tweets, their own texts into the ether. I would do that for GMs. I'd do that for you. If you tell me something, I'm going to believe it. I assume we're friends, and I assume that you're telling the truth. So if you tell me generational player at number 1 overall, I'll say, hey, it must be Travis Hunter. I believe what you're saying. But here we are.
Slightly different. You'll both carry the water, but yours is more of like an innocent, doe-eyed gormlessness that just like runs with whatever they tell you. Like, oh, look, he said it. Why would he lie?
I'm just a sucker. A sucker is what you're telling me. I told you I would, if I was in the seat though, I would put out some good stuff. I would put out some really good stuff. Like the James Pierce stuff. If I'm sitting there, if I'm Philadelphia at 32, I'm doubling down on the James Pierce hate. Get him to me. Drop him to me. You don't think they had people pushing the Jalen Carter narrative? Oh, yeah, this can't have this guy in the building. Drop to 9 to us, baby.
Maybe they had him arrested.
Now you're thinking, 6D chess, baby. You think Howie's just good at managing contracts? He's got the whole thing, baby. The whole thing going.
Now Georgia network, right? He's in deep with whatever's going on in Georgia. You think he can't have a guy pulled?
He's got them all doing the drag racing. He's got them all drag racing, which, by the way, happened again.
What is it with that program? Like, they're generally speaking actually tight together, but anyone that does get in trouble is in trouble for some form of motor vehicle
that's it.
Infraction.
Nothing else, just drag racing.
Right.
At Georgia. Anyway, so I say all that to say Cam Ward going number 1. We don't have to talk about it too much. We spend a lot of time on Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, and the QBs every single week, but this is becoming the chalk pick. The expectation is that the Tennessee Titans will take Cam Ward at number 1, and Mel Kiper completely agrees with his most recent mock.
Yeah, it's been a while, actually, since I've seen a mock that didn't have Cam Ward at number 1. I mean, it is not only is it becoming the chalk pick that he's QB1, that it's him over Sanders. It's becoming, I think, fairly accepted that he'll be the first pick off the board, that he'll be number 1 overall. I think it's seeming like he's going to go to Tennessee as well. Like there was, that time where Titans and the Giants had the same odds effectively to pick number 1 overall, implying that Vegas was expecting really the Giants to trade up and grab that. It's been a while since I've seen anything other than number 1, Tennessee Titans select Cam Ward out of Miami. That's becoming, this is how everyone thinks the draft is going to start.
All right, let's go to numbers 2 and 3 because this is it already gets interesting here. The last couple times you and I have done mock drafts, either when we've gone back and forth or when we've teamed up as we did last week, we went with the quarterback, right? We sit there and we talk through it and we say, well, what's Cleveland going to do at QB? All they have is Kenny Pickett right now and whatever's left of Deshaun Watson. Of course, they have to draft a quarterback. So we end up taking Shedeur Sanders, and then we say, well, the Giants have a decision to make now. What do they do? And Mel just says, okay, forget Cleveland getting a quarterback. Well, let's go Abdul Carter, the edge rusher out of Penn State at number 2 overall. And then it's Shedeur Sanders to the Giants at number 3. So that those back-to-back picks, this dictates a lot, especially for the Patriots and Jags at 4 and 5. They're hoping the blue chip players that are not quarterbacks, they hope that they fall. And then we have just the general QB conundrum. The one piece of news that happened since the last time we aired, last Thursday, when we had Mike Renner on the show, by the way, awesome having Mike Renner on the show and getting all of his draft takes. But Jameis Winston signed Friday evening with the New York Giants officially, 2-year, $8 million contract. So Jameis is in. Certainly doesn't keep them from drafting a quarterback, but boy, the memes were hot, man, as far as picturing, just imagining Jameis Winston and Malik Neighbors with a full 17-game schedule together.
I mean, Jameis and the New York media market feel like they were made for each other, really. So I'm glad that that's going to happen, regardless of whether or not he's actually starting. The fact that he's now present within the New York media market and all of the madness that entails, I think is a gift for all of us.
So yeah, we enjoyed that news on Friday evening. So what are your thoughts here? Cleveland goes Abdul Carter at 2. Shedeur Sanders goes at 3 to the Giants. You'd have Shedeur in the room with Jameis and Cutlets. Oh, what a like, is there a better trio? Is there a better trio? A better quarterback room, Sam? Is there a better reality TV show than that QB room? But,
I mean,
that'd be sweet.
Who would you want to to model how to be a professional more than Jameis for your young quarterback? I do think so. As much as it's becoming chalk, what?
And Cutlets too.
Cutlets. It's becoming chalk that like Cam Ward goes number 1 overall. It does feel like I don't know that anyone actually has a good handle on what the Browns are thinking or want to do like that. It feels like this draft it just genuinely started number 2 overall. There's a bunch of people still putting Shedeur Sanders at 2. They need a quarterback still. Kenny Pickett is not stopping you grab a quarterback. There's talk that they could be in the Kirk Cousins sweepstakes if he ends up getting out of Atlanta. As much as, man, I don't know, Kirk Cousins and his arm in Cleveland. I mean, I've said I don't think Cleveland's weather is a particularly big deal for Shedeur Sanders. It might be for Kirk Cousins, though. Like that, I mean, there's a difference between Shedeur's arm, which is just okay for the NFL. Like, it's fine. It's right down the middle somewhere. It's on the fairway. And Kirk Cousins' arm, based off last year, which is, man, there are throws you can't make anymore, and we need to rework the offense to eliminate those from the system. That's a different level of arm. I would hate to see Kirk Cousins in, well, the masochistic, like car crash, rubbernecking side of me is fascinated by that idea. But I feel like that would be a terrible idea for everybody involved to put Kirk Cousins in Cleveland. My point being, I don't think Kenny Pickett is stopping you drafting a quarterback at 2 overall. I think if you then sign Kirk Cousins on top of that, that probably is. But I don't think anyone knows. Like, are they just exploring all options, or are they actually out on a quarterback at 2? They're going to take the best defensive player, which is probably Abdul Carter, and figure out quarterback somewhere else, or just not even bother this year and lie in the bed that they've made themselves. I don't think people have a good handle on that.
Russell Wilson also in play for the Cleveland Browns.
Which is a better option than Cousins.
I mean, here's the thing, right? When we talk a lot, let's talk about the Browns for a minute here. We talk a lot about teams resetting and rebuilding and what have you. It's usually teams that are at the top that have, new regimes, new general manager, new front offices, a team like the Tennessee Titans that now has a fresh general manager in Mike Bergonzi, someone like Chad Brinker, who's basically in year 2 running the show above the GM at the president level and reshaping everything. Okay, they could take a year. Can Andrew Berry with Cleveland, been there, 6-7 years, can he have a reset year for Cleveland? Because if you're sitting there and you're being honest about yourselves and you say, look, we're in the same division as the Ravens, the Bengals, and the 9-win Steelers, right? We've got some pretty good teams here. We're the 4th best team right now. A lot of the strengths, I think the strengths that the Browns have had the last couple of years is the depth of the roster. I think that's been chipped away at the last couple of years. I think their offensive line depth has been chipped away at. They haven't had a first-round pick. This is their first round pick in a few years now because of the Deshaun Watson move. Are they willing to not punt? I hate saying punt on this season, but like I was saying about certain teams in our rebuilding series, do you just think to 2026? Do you just think 2026? And if you're doing that, you can say, hey, well, let's just take Abdul Carter. The same way back in 2017, they passed on, doesn't look great in hindsight, but they passed on the quarterback class. Mitch Trubisky was the top quarterback off the board, then Patrick Mahomes, then Deshaun Watson. And they said, no, we're getting Myles Garrett. Right. And then the next year they got Baker Mayfield. It looked like it played out fine. But yeah, of course, in hindsight, you would take Mahomes, but nobody was like saying that at the time. So do you punt on the first round quarterback this year? And I'm not saying tank for Arch or anything like that, but I'm saying think 2026 because you have every key offensive lineman essentially in the last year of their deal in Cleveland. That used to be a strength. The defensive line depth has been depleted a little bit. They've got some decisions to make in the next couple of years, and they might be better off looking at next year if you're the Browns.
Yeah, but so the Browns are a unique, unprecedented situation where it's not just the normal dynamics of you don't have a quarterback. What do you do? Do you take one now? Do you wait for a year? Do you stop gap with a veteran, try it again next year? They are in this unique situation because they have no quarterback, and yet they have one of the best paid quarterbacks in football stuck on the roster, occupying not just a roster spot, but one of the most egregious contracts in the NFL. So that they're looking at this situation and saying, the only way out of this hell that we've put ourselves in is to find another quarterback who isn't taking up a lot of money. And even then, we're not in the normal, like, hey, you just got the best cheat code in football type of thing where you get, the good quarterback on the rookie deal. This just allows you to get out of the situation you're in, where right now you're paying a guy like a top 10 quarterback and he's hurt. Like he's injured again with an Achilles. He's probably not playing in 2025 at all. So you're paying this guy like a top 10 QB and he's basically, for all intents and purposes, not on the roster, and you can't get rid of him. You can't even just get that off the books. If they cut him after like post June 1st next year, so post June 1st, 2026, it's still an $81.5 million dead cap hit for Deshaun Watson. That's a year from now after June the 1st. That's how bad that contract is. So they're looking at this and saying, we just got a gift in, we were supposed to be too good to be here, and yet somehow we've wound up with the number 2 overall pick in the draft. Even if you don't love Shedeur Sanders or Jaxson Dart, whoever you think QB2 is, I think that opportunity of sitting here at 2 is too good to pass up if I'm the Browns. Like, it's the obvious way out of this Deshaun Watson situation. I think you have to take it. I also don't know. Like, okay, if you're Andrew Berry, the one thing that would make you think about that in a different way is what you're saying. Like, what if we just effectively, your punt for the quarterback, we sign, Russell Wilson, we just get through this year. And then next year is when we start to refocus and, we put all our attention elsewhere, yada, yada, yada. The only thing, like, he has to individually weigh up, do I survive that? Right? If that's our plan, like, let's forget about, I don't think Shedeur Sanders is the guy, right? That's a reasonable interpretation. A lot of people have that opinion. I don't think he's the guy. I don't think he's the solution. He's the way out of this. We can take Dylan Gabriel later on this draft, whoever, but it's going to be Russell Wilson. It's going to be Kenny Pickett, and it's going to be some rookie that I signed in the mid rounds this year. We're probably going to stink this year. We'll get a few wins, and the next year is when we'll try and actually put this right. Do I survive that as an outlook? If we win 4 games, everything's kind of a mess, and does the owner let me fix this again at the end of it? I don't know that he does, because okay, you'll have made a lot of good decisions, but you are the architect of the problems. Like, you're the guy that greenlit, whether or not you identified it as a solution, you're part of it. Your name's on it. The owner's not firing himself, so you're the fall guy, right? And then you were the guy that said, no, let's punt for a year. Let's go in a different direction. And then you also have that the specter of, what if Shedeur's good? Like, what if you decided he wasn't the guy, and right away for the Raiders or whatever, he's cooking, or the Jets or somebody takes Shedeur Sanders in the first round that isn't you, and he looks really good right off the bat. You look like an idiot.
Yeah, these are the discussions that are happening, and that's why what I like to replicate on our show, Sam, are the discussions that are happening in the draft room or for each team, and I think those are all fair points. A lot of it does come down to Barry's relationship with Jimmy Haslam, with ownership generally. How much leeway does he actually have? Because we've talked a lot. I don't think this certainly was not Andrew Barry's decision in isolation. He wasn't out on an island, I don't believe, saying, "Hey, we got to go get Deshaun Watson or else."
Right.
It was certainly an all-around team effort, and it may have actually come from the top and not from Barry, right? So we don't know those exact dynamics. So I'll just say this: if they're not going to go quarterback here, they go Abdul Carter. I mean, I'm fascinated by that pairing, right? Him and Myles Garrett for the next few years. That's interesting. I've definitely come around to, if I'm gonna, my first non-QB though is going to be Travis Hunter. I think regardless of who is making that pick, I want Travis Hunter because of all the flexibility and things that we've talked about, his ability to play receiver, play corner, add the extra spot to the depth chart. I just want to lean into that level of versatility and the unique skill set that is Travis Hunter. But I would love to see an Abdul Carter, Myles Garrett 1-2 punch up front, and then seeing what the quarterback situation looks like later. I think regardless, if you bring in Russ, say, you still have to draft somebody later, and then you're looking at probably a first-round quarterback next year as well. And the Browns it's a multi-year effort to get out from under the Deshaun Watson mess, and I think they have to attack it as such.
I mean, it's a multiple-year thing as long as the regime survives a multiple-year process.
No, I know. It's true. So then the Giants at 3. Is this a slam dunk? I mean, we love Jameis. We make our jokes and everything, but if I've said that Justin Fields' $20 million contract is it's a high-end bridge quarterback in today's NFL, certainly a 2-year, $8 million contract for Jameis is a low-end bridge quarterback type of contract. He's not going to keep
the backup contract.
Yeah, it's a backup contract, right? So the Giants are almost certainly drafting a quarterback with Jameis as the backup here.
Yeah, I mean, if one of the top 2 quarterbacks is available for the Giants at number 3 overall, and they don't have to even trade up to get one, I would be utterly staggered if they didn't select him, even if, like, regardless of which one it is. If one of those top 2 guys is there at 3, I would be amazed if the Giants didn't run that pick in. But I do think that Jameis gives you, it's a backup contract monetarily, but I do think that Jameis allows you to not have to start the rookie right away. Like, you don't have to play Shedeur Sanders week 1. And given the state of that Giants roster and the kind of flux that it's in, I would be inclined to put Jameis out there for a while just to gauge, just to calibrate what we're dealing with here. You know, that offensive line in particular is still a work in progress. They've thrown more bodies at it. They're working at it. They're chipping away at that line and trying to make it better. Last year it wasn't that much better. So I would, Jameis is the sacrificial lamb, the canary in the coal mine. Let's see how long Jameis survives before we put Sanders out there.
So you're a Sanders guy overall. Are we gonna officially drop our QB rankings this Wednesday?
Yeah.
So you're good with this if you're the Giants, right? You're Shedeur Sanders, and this fit with the Giants. No problem. You have no problems with his arm. I'll ask you this every show.
Right.
No problems with his arm. The wind in Jersey, dealing with any of that. You're fine with that as far as Shedeur going to the Giants.
Yeah, like Shedeur's arm, to me, it's just any quarterback is going to be better in a dome than not in a dome, right? Like, this is your thing for years. Like, everybody is better in a dome. So with that understanding, clearly you would want Shedeur Sanders to go somewhere that's a dome stadium, right? Where he plays most of his games indoors, and it's never a factor. So absolutely, in those terms, playing in the Meadowlands is not a great place to be playing, but that's true for everybody. So unless the only quarterbacks that are like completely, I think, basically weatherproof or guys like Josh Allen. And, so Shedeur doesn't have a Josh Allen arm, obviously. Neither does pretty much any other quarterback in the NFL. There's like 3 guys that you would put into that category where you're like, it doesn't matter where they're playing. That arm is bulletproof. It's never going to be affected by the wind, the weather, whatever. Everybody else, it's going to be a factor at some point. There's going to be a crappy game where the weather is bad, the wind is high, there's rain, and that guy's going to have a bad day that day. But so is the other quarterback playing in that stadium, unless on that day they happen to be playing Josh Allen or one of those other quarterbacks. So I don't think the Giants are a particularly bad team for Shedeur. I don't think his armor is relevant effectively for them. Now, where the Giants are interesting is that offensive line is still rough. And Shedeur's biggest question to me is his behavior, his play, his relationship with pressure, where Colorado's offensive line was garbage, like hot garbage. And he developed some bad habits under pressure. But the big question is, what happens if you change the volume of that pressure? What happens if you scale way down the amount of times he's under pressure? Does his play under pressure improve? Does his behavior with pressure improve in that situation? And I think if you go back to Jackson State tape, you can see it's a little bit better there. It's not quite as bad as it was in Colorado. Problem is, the Giants are probably the worst team you can find that needs a quarterback for that, right? Like they have the worst offensive line of any quarterback needy team. So if you're picking a team that's like, hey, who takes that concern off the table? It's not the Giants. That's my concern with Shedeur going to the Giants is I think that team has the worst offensive line of any quarterback needy team. And that's his biggest question mark.
Yeah, it's not getting better. It hasn't really gotten better. Maybe a little bit better last year, say the Giants offensive line, but not enough for Shedeur. Drake's asking if the QBs are gone, would we go Hunter or Carter to New York? Do you have? I've already stated I would take Hunter as my top non QB, regardless of team.
1-2.
Yeah. So if QBs go 1 and 2, what should the Giants do if they're not taking a quarterback at 3? Where would you go?
I've been giving them Travis Hunter, but honestly, it's the Jamar Chase, Penei Sewell debate. It's like you can't screw that up. Whichever one you pick is good.
Yeah, I want to play the I always lean to the unknown. The unknown, like Travis Hunter is more of the unknown. There's more ceiling there, right?
Yes.
Because there's a theoretical ceiling of 1.5 to 2 players, which has never happened before in the NFL.
I actually think it's not the way it normally is, where it's just high ceiling versus low floor. Like I actually think Hunter brings quite a high floor because of the sort of various ways that he insulates himself from busting. But I think generally speaking, Abdul Carter is the safer bet, but Travis Hunter brings higher upside and higher ceiling because of that literally unique ability to potentially be a roster spot and a half or 2 roster spots, or the sort of bonus levels of play you get from Hunter, and that ability of, well, if he doesn't make it at one spot, you've got a whole other spot you can try him at in a way that doesn't exist for any of these other players, right? If Carter doesn't make it out as an edge rusher, he doesn't make it. That's it, the end. Whereas if Travis Hunter doesn't make it as a cornerback, theoretically, you can give him a switch to the other side after year 1 or year 2, and you've got a whole another couple of years to figure out if he can be a legit player on the other side of the ball. That's basically unique. Like the last time that was true for a guy is decades ago. So I would probably go Hunter, but again, I think flip a coin. You're right either way.
All right. So the way this plays out here, I would say for the Patriots at 4, especially, but then the Jags at 5, they're rooting for QBs to go higher. That pushes the better players down the board. Maybe Jacksonville gets a shot at a Hunter, but I doubt he does get past New England. I could see the Patriots. So the Patriots at 4 is where Mel Kiper has Travis Hunter going. And I think for New England, all the debates about they have a massive left tackle need. And let's go back and forth through this discussion here. I mean, in my soul, Sam, I'd never want to draft a need over the best player, right? I never want that. So I don't even want to go down that path, but I understand the necessity of a left tackle with no other options for New England. So you at least have to have that discussion. But if Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter falls to 4, I think the Patriots make that pick ultimately, and then still try to figure out left tackle later. So that's what happens here for Mel Kiper in his mock draft. Travis Hunter to the Patriots at 4. If QBs do go 2 out of the first 3 picks, I think New England gets their potential blue chip player here.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's kind of a referendum on whether they believe Will Campbell is a left tackle or not. I mean, we've had this discussion. We had the discussion about Dante Scarnecchia and arm length and how important it is. And, generally speaking, he thinks it's an overrated thing, but he hasn't specifically said, I believe that Will Campbell individually can play left tackle at a high level. Renner has some concerns about Campbell's tape, just independent of the arm length things. Like he's not this, blue chip left tackle prospect on tape, even before you get to the historically short arms, incredibly small wingspan, et cetera, et cetera. Because you look at that offensive line, Vidarian Lowe at left tackle, Cole Strange at left guard, Garrett Bradbury, newly signed at center from the Minnesota Vikings, Michael Wenu at right guard, and then the great Morgan Moses at right tackle.
Yes.
That's still a disaster of an offensive line. Like, now you can still, there's players out there, right? We can still keep working on that. We can still chip away at it. But if you think that there's a left tackle, like the best left tackle in the draft, regardless of whether or not you have a top 4 grade on him, or if you think he's, a 10 to 15 player, the best left tackle in a given draft should be getting drafted to fill that left tackle spot, because that's the situation you put yourself in. Like, if you didn't want to be in that spot where we can't draft the best player available because we need a left tackle, you should have a guy in the building already, right? A guy that isn't Vidarian Lowe. Or they haven't. So to me, it really comes down to, do you believe that Will Campbell is a left tackle or not? If the answer is yes, you basically have to draft him at 4. If the answer is no, then I think your conversation becomes like, can you take Membu at 4? Or do you, or do you think there's just no left tackle effectively in this draft? Or if there is, we're overdrafting him by like a half a round to get him at 4. We're taking the best non-tackle available and then hoping to God the draft falls our way and take one at the top of the second round.
So I think we had parts of this conversation last week, and then you ended up pushing the button on Will Campbell. We were probably going to go that way. It may have slipped my mind that Abdul Carter was available at that point, because we haven't had a lot of Patriots Abdul Carter discussions. He rarely makes it there. I want to go on record until I change it. I'm on record right now until I later change my mind or forget that I said it. Patriots should go with the best player here. Like, this is always my philosophy, and we at least have to talk through how bad they might have the very worst left tackle situation in the NFL if Vidarian Lowe has to start. Cam Robinson just signed with the Houston Texans, which is another, I think that ends up being a pretty shrewd move for Houston to at least throw the Band-Aid on the left tackle spot for 1 year with Cam Robinson and picking up the extra draft capital for Laramie Tunsil. Like, that part of the balance sheet looks really nice for me for the Texans. I think that's a really good move. But that leaves the musical chairs for New England completely without. So now you're talking. So here's the debate. We take Hunter here if you're the Patriots, and then you have Ariante Ursary from Minnesota, early second round. You have the second wave of left tackles, which doesn't generally turn out great. I mean, you don't always get most good left tackles are found in the first round. Like, from a percentage perspective, right? Like, probably 2/3 of the good left tackles in the NFL were found in the first round. And then you find, Braxton Jones was in the 5th, and, right tackle Roger Rosengarten was found in the second round last year for Baltimore. So you usually have to find your tackles early from a scarcity perspective. So you got to play that game. But I still think New England, as much as we always think through this right now, like, the line was so bad, it has to be fixed right now. You still have to think long-term, pick the best player. And I think Hunter would be the right move here for the Patriots. And I want to stay consistent with that. Hunter or Carter over Campbell if you're New England, and those are your options.
So Hunter, to me, again, in an ideal world, you do not want to be drafting for need, right? Generally speaking, drafting best player available, quote unquote, is the sound strategy. And the whole purpose of free agency, regardless of what Jerry Jones thinks, is to actually fill those holes without, overspending, et cetera, but like fill the gaps so that you can get to the draft. And you're not in this exact situation. You're not in this situation where you're in a draft room saying, we have 8 players ranked above this guy, but this guy fills a critical, crippling need that can ruin the entire season if we don't get it filled, right? That's the whole purpose of like off-season team building. But I think you end up in a situation where if you don't successfully do that, if you have a dynamic where the Patriots are right now, which is we went into this offseason with 2 glaring needs. We have the worst wide receiver in the room in the NFL, and we have the worst offensive line in the NFL, or one of the worst 2 or 3. And then we have a young quarterback who desperately needs both of those things to not be true. They had to fix those, and they didn't. So you look at what they've done in free agency. Yeah, they've ticked a bunch of other needs, like they added a bunch of players, but their offensive line is what we read out it to be. It's still terrible. Their wide receiver room still looks horrendous. The only significant addition there was Mac Hollins, who's like a number 4 for most people. Like, this has not fixed anything. Now, Hunter at least allows you to say he's a wide receiver for us. He's wide receiver 1. That fills the biggest need, right? Come in. Suddenly, Travis Hunter is wide receiver 1. Now, Keyshawn Butte and Matt Collins and Kendrick Bourne and the young guys they drafted a year ago, Jalen Polk, Javon Baker, Demario Douglas, like you can start to sell yourself in that receiving core looking a lot better if you simply plug in a legit wide receiver 1 to the top of that. So Hunter at least allows you to do that, right? Say, well, he's not an offensive lineman, sure, but he is wide receiver 1. And that was our other biggest need. And we're cool. We'll go get offensive tackle at the top of the second and maybe the third and, whatever. The problem is if you're just taking him and you think he's a cornerback, right? Or a cornerback that can moonlight. And now you're just taking the best player, which is generally speaking the right way of doing it in terms of the best possible outcomes of that player. But you haven't addressed like the two biggest, like you have 2 Achilles heels. You can't walk. Each one of your Achilles heels has an arrow sticking at the back of it, and you're trying to play in the NFL with a young quarterback. That can't fly.
Yeah, do it later in the draft. That's where you are.
But that's
so Mel.
But the problem with that is that's what they did a year ago, right? They took the quarterback, and it's like we will hammer the other 2 spots with the rest of this draft. And they slung 4 or 5 draft picks at both offensive line and wide receiver. Love the strategy, love the idea. None of it worked. All of those guys were subpar, below standard players.
I mean, yeah, I would have picked better players in all of those situations. I would have picked better players than Jalen Polk and Caden Wallace and Layden Robinson. I think there were better players.
And look, maybe those guys will improve and prove to be productive later on, but you can't bank on that at this point, right? So the problem with that strategy is let's come back later and let's just shotgun it. Let's fire multiple picks at these spots and hope that some of them work out. Like the problem is there's a reason those guys weren't drafted in the first half of the top or the first half of the first round. There's a reason they're available on day 3. The chances are they're not going to work out. And even if you do multiple picks in those spots, they might both stink.
All right, man, let's get to the next few picks here and some of the dynamics that are at play. Jacksonville Jaguars go Mason Graham at number 5 overall. And then the Raiders go Ashton Jeanty at 6 overall. Again, this is Mel Kiper's most recent mock draft post-free agency. So Mason Graham at 5 to the Jags, Ashton Jeanty at 6 to the Raiders. And then Tyler Warren, Penn State tight end, at number 7 to the Jets. You're over there doing backflips. You're trying to talk me into Tyler Warren at 7 to the Jets every single week. And then Jalen Walker, the edge rusher out of Georgia, to the Carolina Panthers at number 8. So let's discuss those 4 picks before we get to number 9. Number 9's the first, hammer curve, knuckle curve from Mel Kiper shows up at number 9, which we'll talk about in a couple minutes here. But Mason Graham at 5, Ashton Jeanty at 6, Tyler Warren at 7, Jalen Walker at 8. Graham makes sense. That's kind of chalky, right? That's the expectation that he's a top 5 or 6 player in this draft. The Raiders and Jeanty, I've highlighted as, hey, now that they've filled a few other needs, you could see this happening. I could at least see this happening with Pete Carroll in town there. And I think the Jets decision at 7 is one of the most challenging decisions that we have every week when we're here, because they have so many needs, and they have needs at key positions, at receiver, at offensive line, at tackle, at quarterback, right? They have needs, or at least long-term needs, at some key positions. That's why it always feels dirty to me pulling up a tight end. But here's the question I'll ask. We don't see Teteroa McMillan for a while in this mock draft, and I still think he's a very good player. I would have a tough time if I need a pass catcher like the Jets. I'm having a tough time saying Tyler Warren over a Tet McMillan, just from a pass catcher perspective. So what are your thoughts on these few picks here?
Yeah, Mason Graham to the Jags is one of those chalky picks. I think that's got to be one of the most popular kind of team player, individual matchups in this draft. I think it makes sense. I mean, that's why it's happening a lot. Jeanty to the Raiders is interesting. Like them getting Geno Smith changes the entire complexion of their offseason, right? Particularly with that connection with Pete Carroll already there. Carroll's history of how he's operated a roster and a team. Ashton Jeanty, I think, makes a lot more sense now than he did previously for the Raiders. So I get that. I think they desperately need defense as well, but Jeanty being there is a theoretically rare opportunity. I mean, Mike Renner was saying he's the most special running back to come along in a long time, like higher than Bijan type of prospect. And if that's accurate, and I don't, there's no good reason it isn't based off his history so far, then 6 is probably the highest you take him. It's where he belongs, I think, in terms of the highest justifiable spot for him. That makes a ton of sense. Warren versus McMillan is effectively your discussion. I think Warren is a better prospect than McMillan. Now, I think McMillan's wide receiver position is a more valuable position generally than tight end. But, we have seen that if you find one of those rare special tight ends, those guys are worth those higher draft picks. The problem is there's fewer of those guys around, and I think your chances of hitting on one are probably lower than they are at wide receiver. But if you knew you were getting a Travis Kelce or a George Kittle or a insert your difference making tight end here, you're telling me that guy's not worth the 7th overall pick?
That guy is.
He is.
Yeah, of course that guy is. I've tried to preface this on the show before, Sam. If I knew I was getting an elite tight end,
right,
of which there's 2, 3, 4 in the league at any given time, absolutely that guy's worth the top 10 pick. I was fine with Kyle Pitts at the time because I thought he could be that guy. I was fine with Brock Bowers going in the top 10 because he could be that guy and looked like that guy in year 1. If I know that's the case, absolutely they're worth top 10. So when we talk about positional value, like there's layers to the positional value aspect of it. And Renner made the point on Thursday's show last week that like Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, right? Mahomes had Kelce and Brady had Gronk. I get it. I think Mark Andrews has shown, even when Lamar Jackson got hurt, that dude can make plays. Darren Waller, when he was at his best for a couple of years, I thought was an absolute game changer. I think George Kittle has been a game changer. If I could have a top 4 or 5 tight end and you can guarantee that for me, I'll take him in the top 10. And if you can guarantee that for me with Tyler Warren, I'm fine with him at 7. But we're always dealing with probabilities here.
Yeah.
And I certainly believe the probability that he becomes a top 3, 4, 5 tight end in the NFL is much lower than Brock Bowers, say, just by comparison, and maybe not even that much higher than Colston Loveland, the next tight end in this draft.
Yeah, and the problem is tight end in particular, I think, even these guys that look like they have all the tools randomly are just not that good in the NFL, right? Like there's elite level prospects at tight end that just become okay NFL players. And I don't think anyone ever has a particularly solid reason for why it didn't work. It's just like, oh, that guy's just turns out isn't that good. So that it's a higher risk, definitely. But I do think that the payoff is definitely justifiable. I also think, this feels wrong because we compare it to the Brock Bowers thing a year ago, where we basically had the same debate in terms of team fit. Do the Jets draft Brock Bowers at 11?
I'm not doing that. You bring this up a lot. I don't care. A lot of people do. Yeah, I mean, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
There's enough people make this argument that it's worth repeating consistently. You can't look at each draft and compare it to the last one because the same players aren't available. The teams are different, et cetera, et cetera. It feels wrong. You shouldn't have Tyler Warren ranked above Brock Bowers in a vacuum in any, if you were ranking draft class versus draft class versus draft class, Warren is below Brock Bowers every single time, right? He's ranked below, but you're not ranking Tyler Warren relative to last year's draft class, relative to Brock Bowers, relative to all the needs at the top 10 in last year. You're ranking it a year in advance where Brock Bowers is not in this draft class and the draft is different. So for a start, 3 of the top 10 picks last year were elite wide receiver prospects, each of whom would be wide receiver 1 in this draft class. So 3 of your top 10, almost 30% roughly. I haven't done the math, but more give or take. 30% of your top 10 last year is taken up by players that are elite and a higher level than are available this year. So it changes, right? You can't sort of say, well, he went higher than Brock Bowers a year ago, and that's wrong, because it's not the way drafts work. You can't compare them year on year as if they're the same decision.
We have smarter listeners than this. They don't need to hear this point all the time. They realize why Brock Bowers went. He was the 5th non-QB off the board, 6th QB non-QB off the board last year. I mean, that's legit. He deserved it. So anyway, it feels dirty to me because I don't think Warren is the elite prospect, A, and then B, the other needs for the Jets. I think it's very difficult when you don't even have a wide receiver 2, you don't have a right tackle, and you could use help on the defensive side of the ball, edge or corner, a lot of other needs for the Jets to go tight end. But like you have articulated well, if you can get an elite tight end, because I think like the solid tight ends, the cogent tight end is easy to get in today's NFL. It's readily available. The elite tight end is difficult though, and those guys are absolute difference makers. But I think the Jets' decision here at 7, and it puts a lot of pressure on the rest of the draft. Carolina at 8, I think, is in a really difficult spot as well, because when we talk about the Panthers and their acute needs, I think for the last year we've been talking about them improving their pass rush. We know they're in on Milton Williams until the end. They get Turk Wharton to come in. They spend money on him. Pat Jones. They still have a need as far as pass rushers go. But now we always end up in this spot, Sam, where this next tier of pass rushers beyond Abdul Carter all have the yeah buts attached to them. Yeah, but, Jalen Walker's had this multi-position versatility, hasn't played a ton. Mykel Williams doesn't look as explosive and had some injuries. James Pierce, Mike Green, some off-field questions. Are they top 10 caliber players? Are they going to go later in the first or even fall out of the first round? So the Panthers are in a tough spot here when we talk about their biggest needs, particularly on the defensive line. So Jalen Walker here, this is one of those picks that has been pretty common over the last couple weeks, but I feel like I've seen this wide breadth of expectations for Jalen Walker as a top 10 player for some, and then for others, maybe later in the first round.
Yeah, this feels like a very common pick at the moment, Jalen Walker going to Carolina. I think ultimately they're looking for the best defensive lineman available. Like, if you were pitching, what's the ideal mock draft for Carolina? Like, the ideal scenario is somehow Mason Graham is sitting there at 8. Like, if they got Mason Graham at this spot, I think they would absolutely love that, even with the plan Bs that they brought in because they didn't get Milton Williams. I mean, Mason Graham could be better than Milton Williams very quickly. Like, if he's that level of prospect, if they got him at this spot, I think that would be amazing. If he's gone, and we expect him to be, then they're basically like, which one of these red flag pass rushers is your favorite? Like, what's the red flag that scares you the least, right? Is it sample size? Is it size, period? Is it lack of production? Like, what's the thing that scares you the least amongst this group of like very good pass rushers? It's just that each one of them has a weird thing to be scared of. And it's just a case of pick your poison.
So yeah, this has been a common pick here. Jalen Walker to the Carolina Panthers at 8. So that's where Mel has gone. And then Mel, going through Mel Kiper's most recent mock, post-free agency. Mel has the biggest surprise, a Mel bomb. Do we have a name for this thing? The biggest surprise in the mock draft. We'll talk about that in just a second. But first, as a former professional athlete, I care about what I put into my body, especially when it comes to protein. That's why we're pumped to be sponsored by Orgain. Orgain believes real nutrition has the power to make a real difference in people's lives. This podcast is sponsored by Orgain and their new 30-gram complete protein shake that offers protein-packed real nutrition designed to satisfy cravings without any added sugar. Plus, their excellent source of premium ultra-filter protein with all 9 essential amino acids. Orgain's products are handcrafted with high-quality ingredients, which makes it taste like one of the very best protein shakes I've ever had. And I've had a bunch through the years. I usually, get through my workout and I'm yearning for that vanilla or that chocolate. And Orgain, man, it hits the spot right when I'm done. So if you're looking to feel your personal best, you need muscle support, recovery, or if you're just looking to maintain a healthier lifestyle, Orgain's 30-gram protein shakes check all the boxes. So it's part of my post-workout routine. Right now, I've got one more left before I have to reorder. I got one more chocolate. Can't wait to work out and have that a little bit later today. They also have plenty for the entire family as well over at Orgain. So go check them out, from protein powders to shakes to tons of other nutritional products. You got a little something for everyone. So there are no quick fixes when it comes to your health. If you want more protein, give Orgain's 30-gram protein shakes a try. Head to Orgain.com/checkthemic. Use code checkthemic for 30% off your order. It's the best offer you'll find, but you got to use the code checkthemic for 30% off. One more time, 30% off. Head to Orgain.com/checkthemic. Use code checkthemic. All right, Sam, here we go. Number 9 overall. It is Jaxson Dart, Ole Miss quarterback, going to the New Orleans Saints. We've seen Dart go higher in other mock drafts. We've done the 1-2-3 thing. We've seen that. We have not seen. Well, old friend John Costco has done it as well, if you want to count him in the mock draft world. Jaxson Dart to the Saints. This is the first time I've seen that connection. The Saints, of course, have Derek Carr for at least one more year as their starting quarterback, but a look to the future here for the Saints and new head coach Kellen Moore.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely make an argument that the Saints need, some kind of future quarterback. I think it makes a ton of sense for them to select one. Selecting Jaxson Dart at 9 overall is a hell of a statement. I mean, the Derek Carr thing is probably, it's now a bridge deal. Like they've kind of reworked it so that he's probably got one more year left and they move on from him. Once that's the case, how long that year lasts is, that can be the whole season. That could be 4 games before the rookie comes in. So I think they're in the market. Like, I think they're absolutely liable to take a quarterback at any point. Dart at 9, though, I mean, that's a call.
Yeah, and you and I struggled. We struggle with the Saints at 9. I think the Jets at 7 are difficult. The Panthers get put into a difficult spot, I think, at 8, and the Saints are in a difficult spot at 9, right? They have needs on both lines of scrimmage still, especially depending on what they think of Trevor Penning at tackle. They have the quarterback question. Derek Carr is that dead smack in the middle, mid-tier quarterback that you feel good about when you sign him in the NFC South and you feel like you're ready to move on with. I mean, it's the story of the mid-tier quarterback, right? You're always ready to replace him, but you feel better than maybe 10 to 12 teams around the league. That's Derek Carr. And so QB is in play. And Mel saying he's hearing more and more first-round hype around Jaxson Dart. So we broke down what Les Snead said a couple weeks ago, and look, I might buy into everything, Sam, but maybe I'm going to tune my ear a little bit. I mentioned I'm going to tune my ear more toward the general manager than the media type. Yeah, right. The general manager says this is Les Snead a couple weeks ago on McAfee's show. He says we might see fewer first-round quarterbacks. Some media are skewing the other way. Like, hey, QBs get pushed up. Let's just make this prediction. I don't know if the NFL is going to have this top 10 type of evaluation on a guy like Jaxson Dart, but there's been a little bit of buzz going that way.
Yeah, I mean, there has. I mean, particularly like we put him in our list of kind of off-season risers, right? Like this whole discussion about his stock has been soaring since football ceased to be played. Everywhere we've been, you go to the Senior Bowl, Jaxson Dart's one of the standout players here. You go to the Combine, Jaxson Dart's having a great week. Like everywhere we've been, it's been Jaxson Dart. He's on the rise. So I buy it. I buy the idea that he is on the rise. Having said that, the start of that chart we pulled up the other day was the 3rd round. Like he has been on the rise, but going from the 3rd round, which is where his stock was, according to, average mock drafts in the start of January, to number 9 overall is a hell of an ascent.
So we have some questions in the chat about Will Howard, Tyler Shuck, and some other quarterbacks. We're going to have our QB rankings. You and I are going to do our QB rankings on Wednesday. So we'll have the full Jaxson Dart discussion. We'll give our top. Are we going all the way to 10? We'll at least give a top 5 for quarterbacks, but we'll probably give a top 10 each. So we'll do our quarterback rankings on Wednesday. We'll have the full discussion. Ultimately, if you had to make a prediction right now, would you buy into Dart being closer to the top 10 or closer to the 2nd round? Where do you think you read the buzz, Sam? Where do you think Dart ends up? Closer to the top 10 or closer to the 2nd round?
The problem with that is it's the distribution of the QB needy teams more than anything else. So I think he's definitely closer to the 2nd round in terms of where he should go. But it's almost a binary thing. Like if a team's going to take him, the teams that are going to take him are either high or the Steelers. Like the Steelers is like your one team, or a team trading back into the 1st to get him. And I don't know that that's really a big thing these days. So
is there a mystery team? Because Atlanta last year was certainly a mystery team post signing Kirk Cousins from a free agency perspective. Like, could the 49ers surprise us at 11? I doubt it. But are there certain teams? I'm just looking at teams, like the Dolphins, they have Tua, but do they love a guy that they think they could eventually move off of Tua? I doubt it, right? The Colts could be the team at 14 that could surprise, right? Because they've already shown their concerns with Anthony Richardson. They only have Daniel Jones for 1 year competing there. So that's the other dynamic at play. If the Colts love somebody, who else could even, you've mentioned Seattle still maybe be in the market. You think that they are. I don't think that they are with the Sam Darnold deal, but they could get out from the Darnold deal after a year pretty easily. Yeah. So if they love somebody at 18, so those are the other potential curveballs, I think, in the 10 to 20 range.
Yeah, I feel like it's either, I think it's basically a question of, does a team draft him in the top 10 or not? I think there's a bunch of places that could go, even after, the rest of the free agent market. And once we get to the draft, the 2 quarterbacks presumably going in the top 10, there's still going to be a couple of teams there that make sense for QBs. I don't think one of them takes Dart at the moment.
So this is the biggest surprise of the entire mock draft here, Mel Kiper. I think it's the first time I've seen. I don't read a lot as far as mock draft stuff goes. I try to stay clear-headed, but stuff gets sent your way. I have it. This is the first connection I've seen. Dart at 9. We've seen Dart as high as 3, as I've said. You see him commonly at 21 to Pittsburgh. First time I've seen him to New Orleans at 9. I like the creativity from the Godfather here.
The creativity.
All right, pick number 10, Chicago Bears. They go Mykel Williams from Georgia. Now, here's, if you're a Mel, I like to respect the Godfather. I like to put respect on Mel Kiper's name, right? We do mock draft Mondays because the man's made this industry tick. However, Mel is he's calling Mykel Williams an outside linebacker. Mel still, I believe he still lumps 4-3 outside linebackers and 3-4 outside linebackers as outside linebackers. I believe that's the case. So it's one criticism I might toss his way, is that he's still using the outside linebacker label.
Yeah, just from I'm sure he knows the difference, but he does in terms of a labeling, old school labeling.
I went to a comedy show over here in Cincinnati last night. John Christ, little nice clean comedy from John Christ, and not to give away his entire act, but he made a point about, there's like a point in technology where there's a point in your age where you just cut off from like the next piece of technology. So like you're just too old to like do TikTok, or you're too old to do whatever, Uber, whatever it might be. I feel like Mel made the cutoff. He's like, I'm not converting to edge rusher. I'm just not making the conversion. I'm calling them outside backers until I retire. I'm just not doing that. This is Mel's technological cutoff at his age. He's just not going to give in.
I made the switch from nose guard to nose tackle, but I'll be in the cold, dead ground before I recognize edge rusher.
I like the defensive end pick for Chicago. We've talked about, like, every time I've paired them with Ashton Genty at 10, like we did last week, I viewed that through the lens of, I could see them doing that, but I don't know if that's the best move. And I think adding to that defensive front with some of the available players at 10 might be the right move for the Bears. So I kind of like Mykel Williams there at 10 for Chicago.
All right. So, Mykel Williams is interesting because he was in that bucket of like, freaky, athletic, prototypical type of edge rusher. But then, and everyone's like, oh yeah, but the lack of production last year was down to the foot thing, right? You bought into that. Oh, look at his foot injury. That's why he was coming off a bad season. It's all explained now. And as soon as he works out at the pro day, we'll be back to like elite edge rusher prospect, and we can all rejoice. Only he then did his pro day, and it's like, those numbers were not where we were expecting them to be. Now, how much should that affect your opinion of Mykel Williams? Like, this was, the numbers he posted were not particularly good for like a freaky level edge rusher.
I don't think he's a length player. Like he's more of I don't know who wins from. I was gonna say JPP. Length win JPP later in his career, because he obviously had the freak workout early in his career, but he became like a power edge length winning type of player. That's how I think that's the style of Mykel Williams, but it's not a great 1-for-1 comp, because JPP he does backflips and was a great workout guy. But by the middle of his career, you weren't like, wow, JPP is just incredibly athletic. He's a hard edge setting run defender who's a pretty good pass rusher. I think Mykel Williams has that type of ability. Jadeveon Clowney in the middle of his career. Now, both of those guys had the athletic freak foundation first. So maybe that's part of the issue there.
And it's not like his workout, like the numbers weren't bad, but it was like 4.75 40 at 267 pounds. So he was both smaller than he was supposed to be, if you like, and slower than he was supposed to be. So you went from like, man, he's going to run fast at a big weight to he ran not that fast at a smaller weight. Just each one of those things worked against him in a way that now the sort of the data points are starting to stack up against his favor, right? It's like not coming off a good year, smaller than people thought he was, slower than people thought he was. Like every little piece of evidence, and these are all just tiny little pieces of the pie, they're all working in the opposite direction of his draft stock.
All right, let's discuss these next 5 picks here. Just to reset a little bit, I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but to remind people, we got a good crew here live Monday morning on YouTube. Sam and I both working from home because the Check the Mic studio is under construction. They're building it for us right now. Hoping to be in it. Hoping by draft time here, Sam. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But the studio's under construction, so bear with us over these next few weeks. And we're getting closer to 100% viewer to subscriber ratio, but we're not that close. We're still like halfway there. So if you're not a subscriber, please hit the button, hit the subscribe button, stick with us throughout this draft season. We have a ton of fun and love breaking down all these scenarios. So hit the subscribe button if you have not already, the thumbs up, do all the things as we get into picks 11 to 15 in Mel Kiper's mock. So I'll let you react to these, right? San Francisco 49ers at 11. They go Armand Membu from Missouri. We have the Cowboys taking the second running back off the board, Omarion Hampton at number 12. The Miami Dolphins, they get Will Campbell at number 13. So that's going to feel like a steal given where Will Campbell had been going. The Colts go Colston Loveland at tight end at pick 14. And then the Atlanta Falcons go Marshall edge rusher Mike Green. So 15, the Falcons get their edge rusher. This means in the top 14 picks, we have 2 running backs and 2 tight ends here in Mel Kiper's mock. Anything stand out to you in 11 to 15 here?
I mean, that's the real, that's the real backlash or wave of this whole, low value positions, quote unquote, all cooking recently, whether it's the draft with Jahmyr Gibbs and those and what the Lions did that year, whether it's the Saquon Barkley thing. Like we were like, well, how can that manifest itself this free agent period where there aren't those players? And it didn't really, but here's how it could happen. Suddenly Genty goes in the top 10. Hampton goes just outside of that to Dallas, and then 2 tight ends in that first half as well. That would be pretty insane. Like Dallas, whatever about Genty, I think you can make a case that makes a lot of sense with Pete Carroll and Geno Smith already there. The Dallas Cowboys selecting Omarion Hampton at 12 overall would be wild given their approach to free agency.
So think back to last year when 14 straight picks were all offensive players, or 13 straight picks, whatever the final number was. It all made sense. They were all good. They were all first-round prospects at high-value positions, right? 6 quarterbacks, 3 wide receivers that everybody agreed were elite prospects at the time, tackle prospects. They were all high-value positions and players that you said, absolutely, I could see these guys going in the top half of the first round. They all seem to make sense. This year's draft, you don't have that, right? You don't have a premier left tackle that you say is a slam dunk top 10 left tackle, or tackle, we'll say. You have 1 edge rusher in Abdul Carter, and every next edge rusher, as we've laid out here, has a, what if happened, this and that we have some questions. Receiver, there's no slam dunk receiver, pure receiver, non-Travis Hunter type of player. The top receiver on the consensus board is Ted McMillan, and he ran 4.55, and we don't know if that's good enough. So it is a year where teams are going to just say, I think this guy's a great running back prospect. I'll take the running back. I'll take the tight end. You're going to see, quote, lower value positions. You might even see a Nick Emanwari if somebody loves his athleticism, taking him in the top 15, or Malachi Starks, as he's been soured on a little bit, going in the top 15. So I think you're just going to see teams taking the best football players. And this is reflected in Mel's mock. Omarion Hampton at 12, though, to Dallas. I know we've linked them to Genty before in the past, and fixing that running back position. It's another one that's not going to feel great just because of some offensive line needs, wide receiver 2 needs, and probably just some edge rusher needs as well with some of the turnover up front for the Cowboys.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know where, like, he is a guy whose stock is on the rise, but this would still be a fairly significant reach relative to the consensus big board, which right now has him at 29. So you're still, and that, like, the higher up that you get, the more kind of acute the reach is, right? Like, the higher up the first round, the more theoretically the sort of steps are. It's not a linear deal. So, I mean, man, this would be a wild thing. Like, you can make a case that is a reasonable situation for a running back to step into. Like, I think there's a lot of question marks about that offensive line, but not that it's definitely going to stink. There's a world where Tyler Guyton, Tyler Smith, Cooper Beebe, Robert Jones, and Terrence Steele forms an above average, maybe pretty good offensive line. Now, there's also a world where it forms a below average offensive line and the whole offense has problems. But you can sell yourself on that being a situation where a top running back can step in and make a real difference immediately. But I mean, I just, because of the way they've approached things, right? We don't fill holes in free agency. Well, you've left yourself with holes. Like, this team, I think, needs other positions more than they need a running back. Like, I don't love Tet McMillan, but Tet McMillan here makes more sense to me than Omarion Hampton.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I remember back in the 2021 draft, I made the point live on air. There was a point in the draft where I think 3 linebackers came off the board and only 1 edge rusher, or maybe it was 3 before the first edge rusher, which was Jalen Phillips. Now, in hindsight, we know that linebacker Micah Parsons eventually became an edge, but at the time he was drafted as a linebacker. And that felt almost like, is this a philosophical switch around the NFL? Is this a statement about the class? When we are live on air on draft night, Sam, which we will be, right? Again, for everybody here, we're going to be live. We're going to do our own show live draft night. So just get ready. I know it's about a month away, exactly a month away today. So just set your plans here. Part of the reason why you need to subscribe. We'll be live on air, instantly react, and then we'll do a podcast on the same exact stuff right after. So we're going to be live on air. And if it goes like this, I'm going to say, really, we're going to have 2 running backs and 2 tight ends before the first non-Travis Hunter receiver off the board. That would be a story. This would be a massive story to me if Tet McMillan is dropping this far in a wide receiver needy team like Dallas passes on him. Because I'll say this, if the knock on McMillan is 4.55, and do you really trust him to be this elite all-around wide receiver? We were talking about the fit with Jacksonville and complementing the more athletic Brian Thomas Jr. on the other side. What if he was in Dallas opposite CeeDee Lamb? And CeeDee Lamb, can do the wide receiver 1 things. In Jacksonville, we believe after 1 year, Brian Thomas Jr. can do the wide receiver 1 type of things. McMillan being the high end 2, the T. Higgins on that team. Like, can Ted McMillan be the T. Higgins the same way Higgins is to Chase, right? Could he be that guy for Brian Thomas Jr. in Jacksonville or CeeDee Lamb in Dallas? Absolutely. I think he can. So this would be a massive story to me. McMillan continues to fall in Mel's mock and the Cowboys take a running back instead. I do think that would be a huge mistake for the Cowboys.
Yeah. And to be clear, I don't care at all that McMillan ran a 4.55. That's what I would have expected him to run from his tape.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
My concerns or reservations with McMillan existed long before that. Like, it was, I don't want to lump him into other receivers that I've thought similar things about, but it's like my initial reaction was, really, this guy's wide receiver 1 in this draft class? Like, are we sure about that? Because it doesn't immediately look like that. Like, I'm not. Like, a lot of times you look, okay, this guy has been labeled as wide receiver 1 in a given draft. You watch through the tape and you're like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. McMillan, you watch through the tape and you're like, really? We can't find anybody better than this? Like, so I don't want to. There are other receivers that I've thought that about where I felt much more strongly that this guy is nowhere near that level. I think McMillan is good. He's just not great. And I expected him to run if 4.55 shouldn't be changing the way you view McMillan. It should be like, that's right alongside what you thought of him in the first place.
So I think someone's going to get a steal for him, especially later in Mel's mock. I want to talk about Dallas just for a minute. Chat's talking a little bit about Tyler Guyton. I thought that was the riskiest pick in the draft. He was my least favorite first-round pick last year for Dallas. It showed up as Plato mentions in the chat here, shows up in a 49.4 PFF grade last year. He was a project who I thought every few reps it looked right, but he had so many losses, the production just wasn't there, that was too risky for me personally. So far, that looks all right. Now, and I just want to highlight really quick the fickle nature of drafting, right? There was a 3-year period here where Dallas brought CeeDee Lamb, Trayvon Diggs, Tyler Biadasz. Like, that's an incredible draft in 2020. 3 high-end starters. Then they bring in Micah Parsons and Osa Odigizua in the next draft. That's outstanding. And they kind of stumbled into Micah Parsons, right? They wanted the corners ahead of him. They wanted Patrick Surtain and J.C. Horn. That still probably would have ended up okay. They brought in Tyler Smith in the next draft, Jake Ferguson, Deron Bland. If you're getting 2 or 3 high-end players per draft, you're winning the draft. Yeah. Dallas won the draft. Not one, but, they were very successful between 20 and 22. Then they kind of hit their lull, 23 and 24. Mazi Smith, Luke Schoonmaker, DeMarvion Overshown, looks like a pretty good player, but he's battled injuries. And then last year, Tyler Guyton, Marshawn Kneeland, Cooper Beebe, still could be okay. It's, jury's out. I think they've drafted really well overall, but I think it shows how this is very cyclical. And there's a lot of teams that have 2 and 3 year good stretches, then they go down and then they're back up again. Dallas needs a really good draft, though, because I think these last 2 are questionable, and they've got high-end needs at receiver, on the defensive line, maybe on the offensive line, and they got to go that route.
Well, this is why I think this pick has a real chance of actually happening, because you look and you say, okay, Dallas puts themselves in a position regularly where they go into the draft saying we need to fill our most glaring need with the first round pick. That's what they did a year ago with Tyler Guyton, which is how you end up with Tyler Guyton. You can argue left tackle is still the biggest need on this roster because Tyler Guyton didn't play particularly well as a rookie, but they're not going to acknowledge that.
No,
like Dallas is not ready to write off Tyler Guyton after a year. So, this, for example, the next player available in this draft is Will Campbell, who, is theoretically one of the best players in this draft, is a top 10 player on the consensus big board, et cetera, et cetera. Other than the fact that, like Tyler Smith, like theoretically, Will Campbell would be a perfect fit for Dallas, right? Because even if he's not a left tackle, Tyler Smith can play left tackle. He's got that flexibility. It doesn't matter which one you think he plays. Tyler Smith can play the other one. So you take Will Campbell, you solve the left side of your offensive line. But doing that would require them acknowledging after a year that Tyler Guyton's not the guy, and they're probably not going to do that. So then you look at the team and say, well, they could really use a wide receiver too. Are they going to take Ted McMillan? Are they going to take Matthew Golden? Are they going to take Luther Burden? Like, are they going to grab the next wide receiver at that spot? If not, you can argue that running back is the next most glaring need. It's just that it's one that we, don't like filling with the 12th overall pick in the draft.
Speaking of Will Campbell, I thought we spent a little bit of time on Dallas there, but Campbell to 13 to the Dolphins. Remember, they had this feels like a gas mask like fall for of Laramie Tunsil. Of Will Campbell. This is a different type, right? Yeah. Tunsil used a gas mask. Campbell had a bad arm length. It's not exactly apples to apples, but it was the Dolphins benefiting right around pick 12 or 13, right? When Tunsil fell. So this would be a huge win for the Dolphins. Sorry I compared Will Campbell to Laramie Tunsil on draft night. I apologize to Will Campbell and his family and his agent and everyone else.
Yeah.
Just cut it. Don't worry about it. Just cut it. We're getting sued again.
I mean, it would be, we've been saying, Kelvin Banks to Miami has been a reasonably popular pick. I think certainly with us, I think we've liked that fit because, again, you've got Teron Armstead still there, but man, at this point, you have to budget in like missed time for Armstead. He's also reaching the end of how long you're going to have him. Either, you need a left tackle at some point. Patrick Paul, they drafted as a successor at some stage. We don't know if he's going to be that guy yet. Even less, I think, assuredness that you have with Tyler Guyton in Dallas. Like I don't think you can rely on Patrick Paul necessarily. So Will Campbell and or Kelvin Banks, like a left tackle who's got left guard ability or a left guard who's got left tackle possibilities is, I think, a perfect scenario for them. So, Miami could get Will Campbell, slots right in at left guard, and then they could have the Joe Thuney type approach, right? Where if Teron Armstead goes down, maybe Will Campbell is actually the best solution to replace him instead of Patrick Paul if they need him for a few games. Like, I think that would be a great pick for Miami.
This is another one similar to the Ted McMillan discussion, Sam. Because of where we've been talking about these players, this will feel like a draft night steal. This would, you know, he would make the top 5 lists of best steals of the night, but it's also a realistic outcome. If there are enough teams up there that are going to cross him off the tackle list for them, there's a realistic possibility that he does end up in the teens. And there's another tackle that falls later in Mel's mock here that's worth discussing as well.
I mean, not just that, but if teams, and I would imagine most of them feel this way, if teams legitimately think he's a guard, not a tackle now, based off those measurements, this is where he should go. I mean, this is around the range where a high-end guard prospect, like an elite guard prospect, should be going. So yeah, you're right. It's weird because it'll feel like a steal because we've been talking about him going number 4 to the Patriots and, you know, thinking of him as a left tackle for a lot of this process. But actually, if he is a guard and, you know, just in a really high-end guard, but not like a transcendent Quentin Nelson caliber prospect guard, this is pretty much exactly where he should go.
Anything else in that 11 to 15 range? I like the Mike Green pick for Atlanta. I think they're in the edge market regardless. And I think that, again, if he checks out off field and you're willing to take him in the first round, getting him at 15, you have a chance to get maybe the best pass rusher in the draft. And yes, that includes Abdul Carter. I think Green is potentially that good coming out of Marshall.
Yeah, I think Mike Green has top 10 tape. Top 10 tape. Your concerns are the twofold. Number one, off-field stuff, which we're just not capable of checking out. That's a team thing. We'll bring it up because it's relevant to where his draft's like spot is going to be, but we don't actually know enough to, you know, to accurately kind of quantify the impact that it should have. And then the fact that he did it at Marshall rather than in the SEC or whatever. He answered some of those by going to the Senior Bowl, wrecking a dude on a day and then bouncing. At least enough to show, you know, he can hang at that kind of level at an all-star level. But like, he has been excellent and has way more of a sample size than a lot of these other guys. So if that's the red flag that scares you, you know, we only saw this for 300 snaps for this guy. Well, Mike Green has a lot of tape of him crushing everybody. So love that pick. Colson Loveland to the Colts. People have been talking about Tyler Warren to the Colts for a lot of mock drafts. You know, there are people out there that think Colson Loveland is the best tight end in this draft, not Tyler Warren. Either way, they're both seen as, you know, clear first-round players. I think that makes a ton of sense as well.
Yeah, I mean, I get the tight end Colts pick because it's a very specific, massive need right now. And it does make that group of the group of pass catchers with Michael Pittman Jr. as the possession guy, Josh Downs, like this, the actual fits of all these pieces make sense, right? Pittman is the possession guy, Alec Pierce deep threat, Josh Downs out of the slot, A.D. Mitchell, whatever he ends up becoming, guy who gets open, but maybe the QB doesn't know it. And then Colson Loveland at tight end. I mean, you could make the case that depth-wise, that ends up becoming one of the better groups of pass catchers in the NFL. Maybe not the most explosive or the most this or that, but depth-wise, it has that potential. And then it's like, all right, no excuses for Anthony Richardson and or Daniel Jones there for the Colts. All right, let's go to pick 16 here. Arizona Cardinals, Mel Kiper's mock. Cardinals go Will Johnson, the cornerback out of Michigan. Bengals at 17, Shamar Stewart, the edge rusher out of Texas A&M. Seattle Seahawks go Nick Emanwari, the safety out of South Carolina. I think we've had that one before, at least had that discussion as a fit. Tampa Bay Bucks, we've had this one as well. Jihad Campbell, a linebacker out of Alabama, going to Tampa Bay. And then at 20 overall, the Denver Broncos take Tedoroa McMillan, the wide receiver out of Arizona. Once again, Sam, I'm picturing Thursday night. Oh, I love the feeling. Thursday night, you got the first round. You're looking into night 2, and everybody's writing their top 5 steals of the draft. You would say Will Campbell's up there, but boy, this would be number 1 on a lot of people's list. I believe Ted McMillan at 20 to the Broncos would be an absolute steal if this went down on draft night.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the right range for him as well. Like, based off, again, I think he's good, not great. I think we talked about him going to Tampa Bay at one point. I think 19, 20, like this is the range where I feel a lot more comfortable about Ted McMillan than in the top 10 as, you know, wide receiver 1 in this draft class. I think he's got, you know, obviously the frame is huge and his ability to make spectacular catches. He gets comped a lot to Drake London just because they're both huge. I don't think that's a particularly sound comp. I don't think they play very similar. I think he's miles away from Drake London in terms of his ability at the catch point. I know there's a bunch of highlights out there of McMillan like one-handing a ball, but I think a lot of that is because he
over Travis Hunter.
Right. Travis Hunter, by the way, for a guy who I do genuinely think is probably cornerback one, he's got some real lowlights on his tape. Like he's got wrecked by one-handers from McMillan. Ayo Manor, the Stanford receiver, like put up like 190 yards against him or whatever, 290 something overall, but like 190 against Travis Hunter specifically, including mossing him like the Prothero catch, like around Travis Hunter in the end zone at the end of that game. That's not great. Anyway, so he's got a lot of these one-handed plays on tape. I think a lot of that is because he goes for those at an absurd level. Those like old school, the Mel Kiper, I refuse to acknowledge edge as a thing, right? Those old school coaches that are like, if you can get one hand to it, you can get two hands, even though that's physically not true, right? Just as a basic biomechanical statement, it's idiotic. But there are guys out there that like, if you always go two hands, don't ever try and one hand the football. Those guys would tear their hair out at McMillan, who repeatedly goes for these things one-handed and has left a lot of balls on the floor because he's gone with one hand instead of two. But I don't think he's nearly as good as Drake London at the catch point. Having said that, I think he's significantly better than Drake London after the catch, which is actually honestly where I think his strength lies. He's this big body possession guy who can really motor once the ball's in his hands. Suddenly this like fluidity to his running shows up the second the football's in his hands. I think he's an unusual type of wide receiver, but I love him at this kind of range.
I see the chat talking about potential redundancy to Courtland Sutton. Well, Sutton's in the last year of his deal. We talked about Denver just being in a pretty good spot roster-wise. Good players across the board. Maybe not a ton of stars, but good players across the board, including Sutton. And McMillan would be another one of those types of players that just gives them long-term flexibility. For a year, you're talking about McMillan plus Sutton plus Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, who had a really nice rookie season. The depth there would be outstanding for Denver. And I think they are in a position to take the best player available. If it's on the defensive line, if it's at receiver, at value positions, I think it would make sense for them. So that would feel like a steal, I think, on draft night. The other, Arizona taking Will Johnson, a guy that, top 10 hype, but, hasn't been able to work out, has the injury. That might feel like a steal at a position of need for Arizona. So I like that pick as well. Shamar Stewart's always an interesting case for me, but the Bengals in particular at 17, a team that I think now that the money's distributed to some of those high-end players, they're in a world where they have to start hitting on those first and second round picks. And, the Miles Murphys and DJ Turners of the world, Chris Jenkins last year, Amarius Mims, they have to make sure that those first and second round picks are hits. Of those last four that I mentioned, they might be at 2 of 4. They might be at 1 of, where jury's out. Shamar Stewart, one of the riskier first round picks. The potential's there, him opposite Trey Hendrickson, or maybe replacing Trey Hendrickson, but that would be an interesting one for Cincinnati at 17.
It would, and it's like there's the draft plan, and then there's actually making the picks correctly and getting the right players. Like Cincinnati, I think, have done a really good job. We're not a million miles away from sort of saying the Bengals have handled their roster like the Eagles, right? They've done smart things. They've future-proofed it. They've planned. They've got succession plans in place. And look at this. They just let these guys walk and then they replace them.
Minus the contract structures, of course. That's a hot topic.
Yeah. But the point is, we would be hailing them as like a smart way of managing a roster if all of their draft picks that they like earmarked for future spots had actually worked out and played well the second they got the opportunity. Unfortunately, almost all of them haven't. And okay, the cornerbacks look like they might be turning it around, and they might actually be the guys that we thought they were. Just it took a while for that to happen. But like Miles Murphy on the defensive line, similar idea, right? Like they theoretically would have been looking to now, like we can move on from Trey Hendrickson because Miles Murphy stepped in as a former first round pick. He's now ready to take over as like the alpha pass rusher in this group. Only Miles Murphy he's at this point is a bust. So they're going back to the well and, in this mock, bringing in a guy like Shamar Stewart to try and fix the spot that they correctly identified as like, here's where the roster is going to open up a hole in a couple of years. We need the guy now. Like this is the sort of the risk with the draft of even if you approach it, I think, in a smart way of like, we're going to get these guys in the building, not for now, but for the future, you still need to find the right guy. Otherwise, the whole plan goes up in smoke.
Anything else as far as Worry to the Seahawks? The Campbell Bucks fit, I think we're going to see more of that. Alabama linebacker Jahad Campbell as, future replacement for Levante David, but also probably first-year starter next to Levante David. Anything else of those picks that stand out?
I mean, I think those picks all make a lot of sense. I like them. I think Worry to Seattle makes some sense. Mel's says he reminds him of Kyle Hamilton, and obviously there's that Mike McDonald, Kyle Hamilton connection. I don't know if that's necessarily the best comp for him, but I like the idea of bringing in a guy like that for McDonald's secondary. Obviously, the elephant in the room there is they're not going interior offensive line, which remains the single biggest problem on the Seahawks roster and has for a couple of years now. And then I like Jahad Campbell to Tampa Bay. That just is a good fit.
The reason why I would not make the Kyle Hamilton, Nick Worry comp is because Hamilton was a player we were talking about going in the top 5.
Yeah.
Who ran slow and fell to 14.
Right.
Worry was a guy we were talking about as a fringe first, in part because of his athleticism, crushed the combine. Now he's moved up to maybe he goes as high as 14 or 15 and in the middle of the first round if people value that athleticism. In other words, Kyle Hamilton was a much better college football player that has projected very well to the NFL level.
And I just don't think they're that close stylistically either. It just doesn't feel like a good comp, period.
Look at you attacking the Godfather, Mel Kiper. All right, wide receiver run has started, right, in Mel's mock here. We're at pick 21. So McMillan goes at 20 to the Broncos. First wide receiver that's not named Travis Hunter coming off the board. 21, the Pittsburgh Steelers go Derek Harmon, the defensive tackle out of Oregon. And then at 22, Matthew Golden, wide receiver out of Texas. He goes to the Chargers. And then the Packers go receiver, Emeka Egbuka, the wide receiver out of Ohio State. Minnesota Vikings at 24, they take Jahdae Barron, the cornerback out of Texas. And then the Houston Texans, at this time, they took Josh Simmons, the tackle out of Ohio State. I don't know if the Cam Robinson one-year deal would skew this at all, but it would actually be a pretty nice little team-building move, I think, from Houston to continue to think to the future for that offensive line and think for a year 2 replacement, next year's replacement for Cam Robinson at tackle. So I don't know if the Cam Robinson signing would change this at all for Mel. Anything that stands out there for you?
Yeah, in fact, I think the Cam Robinson signing makes it kind of perfect, right? Simmons, We don't know how ready he's going to be or when he's going to be ready. So a stopgap left tackle like Cam Robinson, it makes a ton of sense for them. The wide receiver run is interesting. Pittsburgh, number 1, Derek Harmon. I think that's a nice fit. I love his ability to come in, make an impact immediately as part of a rotation, potentially, succeed Cameron Hayward, down the line. That makes a ton of sense for them. Golden to the Chargers is a fascinating one. Golden in general, I think, is going to be a really interesting receiver. Like, a lot of people were in love with him before the 40 time at the combine. That obviously caught everybody's attention. The more I've looked into that, the more I'm convinced it's just a mistake of some kind. I don't know where the mistake has shown up, but like, data suggests that's an incorrect time for Matthew Golden, not independent of the fact that everybody who's looked at his tape has said he's not a 4.29 player. Like, he's a 4.4 flat guy is what everybody said when looking at the tape. I haven't found anybody yet who's looked at him and said, yeah, that's a 4.3 flat guy from the tape. Then you look, so I did a little bit of digging into this. Number 1, I pulled out the actual video and did a frame by frame, like this when he starts, this when he finishes. And I gave him a little bit of leeway. Like, I left a couple of frames so that it was like clear, even with a delay. And I couldn't get any faster than 4.37 or 4.39 or something to get into 4.3 flat. I'm doing it frame by frame, like I'm literally going frame by frame. Like, it's impossible to screw this up. It's only a case of how accurate that is on the thing. To get him to 4.3 flat, he's got to be like half a step into the 40 by the time you press the button to start it. So that's off. That's not true, by the way, for anybody else that ran a 4.3 flat-ish. Those guys are all more or less exactly where the tape said they were. Arif Hassan pulled out the tracking data that they've got, which they measure at intervals, right? 10 yards, 20 yards, 30 yards, 40 yards. His miles per hour numbers are lower than the other 4.3 flat guys at every single interval. So mathematically, it's impossible for him to be at the same time as those guys over the 40. I don't know how, because there's timing blocks at the start. It's laser timed at both ends now, rather than before, where it used to be a manual guy starts it and then the laser stops it. So I don't know how, but I'm pretty convinced now that Golden's time is just a mistake and he's actually a 4.4 flat guy, which is fine because that's what the tape said he was. But I'm just throwing it out there that 4.29, I believe, is a factual error.
I'm gonna continue to try to dig into the Matthew Golden thing, not just trying to find people that feel like think he's that fast, but if we could actually get some hand times from the league or something. I'm gonna do some research. I'm gonna dig in,
find out what the scouts had.
See what the scouts have. I mean, I was sitting next to him that day. Remember I snuck into the scouts.
You could have solved this whole thing if you just had your stopwatch finger.
I was trying to be incognito. I was in an improper section given my access.
Given your dimensions, how incognito do you think you can be in any given crowd?
I don't know, but I walked right past security, right into the team section and sat down. And I was like, well, now that I'm here, I'm not moving.
Yeah.
So I have to leave. So anyway, Matthew Golden to the Chargers, so I like thinking about how these pieces would fit. Him and Ladd McConkey. And look, I don't care how fast Golden is. I think he's a pretty good route runner, knows how to get open. You'd have two nice options along those lines for Justin Herbert and the Chargers. And then similarly, if you have Emeka Egbuka for Ohio State, I think he's getting slept on a little bit just because of how great Jeremiah Smith was for Ohio State. What'd you call him? Go ahead.
He's prime Julio Jones playing in the Big Ten.
Yeah. So it's easy to get, pushed aside a little bit like Egbuka. That's another, like if he went to Green Bay, a Green Bay team where the offseason story, Josh Jacobs, hey, we need another wide receiver one. And our stories every week, who's the number one in Green Bay? Not that you need a one. You don't know where the ball is going to be distributed. You don't know who the guy is going to be every single week. This is throwing another similar receiver into the mix in Egbuka, who's a 2-ish, right? Next to Dobbs and deep threat Christian Watson and inconsistent Dontavian Wicks and inconsistent Jaden Reed. You just have another guy who's not the alpha one thrown into the wide receiver room in Green Bay.
Well, that's the problem. Not the problem. That's the thing with Egbuka is he's a defined, like a lot of these other guys, like can Matthew Golden be the number one wide receiver in a given NFL draft, in a given NFL receiving room, right? With Egbuka, I don't think anyone's even really having that discussion. He is a number two and has always been a number two. Like he's always been at best the second best wide receiver on Ohio State's team. And it's been a series of different receivers that have been the number one guy, right? It's been Marvin Harrison Jr. It's been Jeremiah Smith. So he is a number two. And that, I think that just sort of feels a bit icky when you get to wide receiver, like in the draft, everyone's projecting these guys as like, you need a wide receiver, you need this guy. He's an interesting player because he's already been the role that you're going to have him as at the next level, which is just the secondary option to somebody else. Where it becomes interesting with Green Bay is they have a whole team full of those guys. Everybody on the team is wide receiver 2 to 3, and they're crying out for wide receiver 1. And that's the one thing Egbuka is definitely not. And that becomes an interesting connection for those two.
I think the Vikings pick at 24 too. If they get Jahdae Barron at 24, that's going to feel good. I think coming out of this draft. You made the point too, signing Isaiah Rodgers, re-signing Byron Murphy, having Mekhi Blackman coming back off of injury. That's not keeping you from having a cornerback need, both short and long term. If you're the Vikings, now you're going to get like Barron. I mean, Texas would put him not only at nickel, they put him in the box. Basically playing like strong safety. Think about more versatility in Minnesota now for Brian Flores and his defense. I think this would be an outstanding fit for Minnesota.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the steals of this draft so far. If it went down this way,
we should write articles. That's what we should. All the articles that we used to write, the top 5 steals. It's funny. I used to hate doing reaction mocks. We're kind of, jumping off of other people's content, but we're always about the conversations and the what ifs and everything. But I think it's worth expressing. This happens on draft night, every year. Players fall, or Barron's gone as high as 10 to 15 range in other mock drafts. And we both, I think you love him as a player. I love him as a player. He would be one of our favorite picks here at pick 24.
Absolutely.
Just to answer in the chat, we are no longer affiliated with PFF. We appreciate everybody that is still just finding us. Sam and I both left PFF back in August, joined the 33rd team, started this new show, Check the Mic. Look at that. Welcome to Check the Mic, Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. So, yeah, some people did not find us all season, Sam. I don't know where you've been. You didn't think, hey, man, I used to listen to those guys all the time. Where'd they go? But I'm glad you found us here during the off season. So be sure to stick with us. Same show that we used to run over at PFF, but different name and enhanced a little bit with our new producers. And we have a new studio being built. The Check the Mic studio is in progress right now. We're reviewing Mel Kiper's mock draft. We talked Simmons at 25 to the Houston Texans. I agree. Future left tackle option. That's a nice pick with his injuries and with Cam Robinson on a 1-year deal for the Texans. Let's wrap it up with the last few picks and we'll talk through them. Los Angeles Rams at 26. They go Azariah Thomas.
Your guy.
Florida State corner, right? So now he's sneaking in the first round in a couple of our discussions, but he's much lower on the consensus board right now. He goes at 26 to the Rams. The Ravens get Malachi Starks, the safety out of Georgia. And then the Lions get James Pierce Jr., the edge rusher out of Tennessee. We'll talk about that in a minute. Washington Commanders go Maxwell Hairston, the cornerback out of Kentucky at 29. At 30, your guy, Kenneth Grant, goes to the Buffalo Bills. We're coming full circle here. And then another interesting one. Wow, the Kansas City Chiefs at 31. They get Kelvin Banks, the Texas tackle, falling all the way to 32 in Mel's mock. And then the Eagles, Howie did it again. Walter Nolan, the interior pass rusher out of Ole Miss at 32. Mel is loading up on good football players for all the best teams here. Did he do this on purpose? Because there's a lot of picks where you're going to say, wow, what a steal, at least from a football perspective, for a lot of the better teams in the league here.
Yeah, some really interesting connections later in this draft. Malachi Starks to Baltimore would be incredible. Imagine Starks and Kyle Hamilton in the same secondary. Like, that's got some real juice, I think those two would work really well together. James Pierce Jr. with Detroit, I love as well for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think he would complement what they have already extremely well. Number two, again, like off-field / character / work ethic concerns are kind of the bucket that James Pierce is being thrown into in terms of his red flag, his negative. Let's feel like the Dan Campbell environment is a good one for that. Like, if that's your thing, he's the guy I would bank on keeping your shit together.
That's what I was going to ask about the Lions. We hear about this all the time. Remember, the Patriots used to do this, right? They had such a good foundation. They had such good Patriot way people. Teddy Bruschi's there, and Junior Seau was there, and Tom Brady's there. Now, Randy Moss, who's coming off of a very difficult time with the Raiders, you can drop him in. Or Corey Dillon, you can drop him in, right? And so they had a lot of success with the, quote, bad apple. I don't know. I hate positioning it like that. But guys that were having trouble elsewhere, and you dropped them into this environment. Now, the Lions are a little different because they have been just steadfast and we're going to get our types of players. We're never going to deviate from it. And that's been a huge part of their success. But do they have such a good nucleus right now that you can afford the guy that might not love football, might not bring it all the time? You could drop a James Pierce in there and you're going to elevate him and get the top 10 talent at pick 28 here. It's an interesting pick because if they go that, I think they could. I think Detroit could take this big swing on a James Pierce, drop him into that environment and make it really good.
And his ability to just get heat off the edge, even if he's not necessarily finishing, you pair that with Aiden Hutchinson, with those big guys in the middle, Alim McNeil, DJ Reader, they brought back Onzarike. They've got guys that can clean up pressures. So even if he does have that sort of Brandon Graham-esque flaw in his game where he's going to get a lot of pressure relative to sacks, this is the right place for that to land.
So yeah, this one, I love that. I would do it. I would do it if I'm Detroit.
Sure.
Now, yeah, James Pierce, who I think he's a little undersized. I think he's got some questions to his game, but he could be really disruptive with Aiden Hutchinson on the other side. I love that fit. Kenneth Grant, he went at 9 in our mock. You have an affinity for Kenneth Grant. I think I like him a little bit more in the mid first round, splitting hairs. But there were early mock drafts before Kenneth Grant's big ascent where he was always linked with the Buffalo Bills at 30. And then the more you hear people say, a lot of people seem to like Kenneth Grant. Maybe he's going to go higher. Well, he's back at 30 here in Mel Kiper's mock. I think this would feel like one of your favorite picks for sure. I know on draft night if Buffalo got Kenneth Grant at 30.
Yeah, this was like a chalky draft pick a month or so ago. And now he does appear to have moved higher than that in most places. I was just looking at his grinding the mocks chart right now, and that's kind of where it was. You go back a while, and his sort of it is later first round. It's been on the rise. Now he's at about number 20 overall on the kind of grinding the mocks consensus. So either way, I feel like this would be a great fit for Buffalo. Like I'm willing to, I don't know why, because I usually don't gravitate towards this type of player, which is athletically freaky, gifted and doesn't do it all the time. Right. But for some reason, I think that Kenneth Grant can be a better NFL player than he was a college player. And I'm willing to buy into that potential. Basically as high as you want to put him, honestly. If I needed a defensive tackle, I'm willing to take Kenneth Grant pretty much as high as I need him. So for him to go to Buffalo at 30, I think it would be an absolute steal.
We're not skipping the Commanders, by the way. We're going to touch on all these picks. I was just skipping around a little bit with what we found interesting within that group. I do want to circle back to 26 really quick with the Rams. Azariah Thomas he's just a big, long corner that is similar to Florida State's former teammate Renardo Green last year, where people would say, hey, Green might be one of the better man coverage corners in the in this draft class. Thomas is similar, not targeted a ton at Florida State, big long corner and young. And if you need a press man corner, I think it's Chavon Ravel from East Carolina, who's coming off his injury, and Thomas. If you just want pure press man, I don't know if that's what the Rams want stylistically, but I kind of like Thomas as a first-round pick. I've put him with Kansas City before. I think they've loaded up at corner enough that they might not go that route later in the first. But yeah, Thomas is a guy that I could see because of the youth and everything and upside goes in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, so it's an interesting mock draft because we've got a few of these cornerbacks sneaking into the back end of the first round, which I think is kind of how it might go in the real draft. And it's going to be a case of like which team. Cornerback rankings are always so strange to me because it's so scheme specific. Like the Rams board is going to be completely different from a different team's board, right? Even if these guys are theoretically in abstract terms ranked in similar ranges. So I think that's going to be interesting, whether it's the Rams with Thomas, whether it's the Commanders getting Maxwell Hairston, the Kentucky cornerback, like which one of these corners is going to sneak into the first round to which team?
We've talked a lot about Malachi Starks to the Ravens. He ends up falling at this point. Another guy that was talked about as high as the top 10, top 15 as a safety has dropped a little bit, but with Ardarius Washington coming back. So Marcus Williams is out at safety for the Ravens. Ardarius Washington comes back off of a really nice season, but only back for 1 year. And then Starks comes in to maybe be the future free safety and a guy that can move around and have the similar type of hybrid ability like a Kyle Hamilton, a lot of versatility on the back end. I would love that fit for Baltimore there. We talked about Pierce. And then the Hairston pick for Washington, the guy, another long corner that ran fast. He's not my favorite corner in the draft here. What are you talking about me? What'd I do? Why are you talking about me in the chat?
Or just the chat was questioning whether Kiper can get up every day and spend 30 minutes loading up with hair gel, as if that's a thing that other people don't do. Other people that might be on camera right now.
You've roomed with me. I'm not spending 30 minutes on my hair every day. It's a pretty quick process.
I'm just saying, like the level of product, I don't think is necessarily. It's a daily thing for some people.
Anyway, Hairston to Washington. I still think this is a need for the Commanders. They bring in Marshawn Lattimore, who looked like a shell of himself at times last year. As aggressive as Adam Peters has been, I don't know that every single move has been outstanding. Are we having keep distracting me. Now you got a poll in the, come on.
I don't think it's a poll yet, is it? It's just a question.
Just a question. I mean, answer the question.
You run a poll.
More product, Kiper or Steve? It's definitely Kiper.
Is it?
Like historically? Definitely Kiper.
I mean,
Commanders have
like volume of product used since like the 1850s. Definitely Kiper.
Focus on the show. Talk about the game, Sam. Marshawn Lattimore is there with Washington. 1 year of Jonathan Jones, We know Mike Sandristill. I call him Mikey. Mikey Sandristill's there. You would prefer to him playing nickel, but boy, did he hold his own on the outside. I don't think having another long developmental corner like Maxwell Hairston is an issue here. So I kind of like that pick for Washington. As far as, again, I don't love Hairston as a player. I think I'd probably take some of the injured corners that are dropping into the second round, but Hairston, athletic, developmental type for me. And then Kelvin Banks falling to 31. I don't know what happened in Mel's mock here that Kelvin Banks is falling. If this is Mel Kiper Jr.'s own evaluation, he's number 13 on the consensus draft board. We've seen him going in the top 10, seen him at 11 for the Niners and 13 for the Dolphins. If he falls to 31, I think Kansas City is sprinting to the podium to get a guy that could be the left tackle of the future.
Yeah, well, I think the thing that happened is Will Campbell slid as well. So, Membu ends up being the first offensive tackle off the board at 11 to the 49ers. Will Campbell ends up sliding to where a lot of people had Kelvin Banks mocked at various points to Miami at 13. And so suddenly you're kind of running out of places to slot these offensive linemen. And, teams like, Minnesota could, if you view Banks as a potential guard, and I think at this point, most people still view him as a tackle, teams that could have had an interior spot went with other players, right? Minnesota got Jahdae Barron, Seattle got Emanwari. So all the offensive linemen just started to fall. And suddenly Kansas City sitting there at the bottom of the first round, and a guy like Kelvin Banks drops to them. I agree. I think they would sprint that in. Again, regardless of whether or not they view him as a tackle. Like, even if they view him as an elite guard prospect at that point, Joe Thuney, they just traded away. Like, that's a massive question mark spot for them, as well as left tackle. So it doesn't matter for them whether he's, they've got Jalen Moore to kind of see if he can be the guy at left tackle. If he is, Kelvin Banks could slot in at left guard instead of Kingsley Suamataia, or as a competition for him. And if Jalen Moore doesn't work out, you've got Kelvin Banks to give that a shot to. So I think this would be a great pick for them.
Yeah. So I think, this is outstanding for the Chiefs. We've talked a lot about the scarcity of tackle, the difficulty the Chiefs have in solving that left tackle spot. If they had this opportunity, I mean, no matter what you think about Kelvin Banks, like, the guy has a chance to play NFL left tackle, probably a better chance than Josh Connerly and Ursery and, some of these other fringe first, more second round type of prospects, the way the board's falling right now. So I think this would be a best case scenario if you're the Chiefs.
Yeah. And so this would be that he could either start day one at left guard, he could take over from Jalen Moore if he's not the guy at left tackle, or he could be the succession plan to Juwan Taylor at right tackle and let them move away from that deal, which I don't think has worked out particularly well. This, though, if it showed up that way, would be a really interesting spot for New England to trade up from the top of the second round into the bottom of the first if a guy like Kelvin. So in this dynamic, we had this argument at 4, right? Do you take Will Campbell because you have to, or do you take what you believe the best player available is and hope that the board falls your way for a tackle later on? If it fell this way, I think from pick 25 on or whatever, the Patriots would be calling teams trying to trade back into the first round to get Kelvin Banks. Yes. And I don't know if Buffalo would move, number one, because it's in the division, number two, because Kenneth Grant is a steal for them. I don't know if Kansas City would move because it's a great pick for them. But like 29, the Commanders, like, if I'm the Commanders and New England offers me this pick, or the top of the second round pick to come into number 29 to get Kelvin Banks, I'm taking that trade-off for moving back half a dozen spots and drafting my cornerback at the top of the second round.
I mean, especially if you're Washington, after you gave up all those picks to go get Tunsil, and then you end up recouping some of those, and you're going to feel like, man, we got Tunsil for even less in that trade.
Yeah.
In the Patriots' desperation. That's another huge dynamic here. I see the chat talking about, hey, Kelvin Banks will never be available here. I mean, I agree he probably won't, but this is literally just, first off, how many times in history, I just want to remind everybody, if we put Michael Penix Jr. at number 8 in a mock draft last year, the chat would blow. You guys would be very upset of the unrealistic mock draft that we had here. So
every year this
happens. And here's the second piece before we talk about Howie and, stealing Walter Nolan at 32. Just so people understand the process and what's happening in NFL buildings right now. The hay is in the barn as far as evaluations go for most NFL teams. They're going to get some pro day data in. They're going to get some medical data in. But for the most part, draft boards are pretty close to final. And they also have a pretty good idea. You know, they're looking at all their picks. We pick at 15 and 47 or whatever their picks are. And they have a pretty good idea of who they think is going to be available there. And for the next month right now, it's a lot of information gathering and trying to figure out, okay, what's actually going to happen. It's draft strategy and going through the various scenarios and everything. And they have to plan for every scenario. And what I would like to replicate on our show, Sam, is the scenario discussion. It's like, because nobody really knows, right? The video's out there right now about the Vikings making sure that they got JJ McCarthy without it. They got JJ McCarthy without a trade up. And they didn't know that Michael Penix Jr. was going to come off the board before. And then they pivoted and said, now we can trade up and go get Dallas Turner. This was unexpected. He was supposed to be off the board 10 picks earlier. And so you have to be able to adjust. So I like having these discussions because Kelvin Banks could fall. Might be a 5% chance that he falls. But you have to at least know how you would operate. And I love what you just brought up. If this happens, yeah, the Chiefs should pounce. But New England, in that tackle situation that we talked about almost 2 hours ago, would have to think about trading up. And they could come out of this draft with Travis Hunter and Kelvin Banks. What would that feel like if you're the New England Patriots filling those two spots?
Last year at this time, last year at draft time, Cooper DeJean was the 22nd pick or 22nd ranked player on the consensus big board, and Johnny Newton was the 24th ranked player on the consensus big board. The player between those two guys was Graham Barton, right? Graham Barton went almost exactly where his consensus spot on the big board was. The other two guys fell into the second round and a while into the second round in some instances. So anybody with saying anything with any degree of certainty a month ahead of the draft is either insane or has not looked at a single draft before. Like, this stuff happens all the time. Is it likely that Kelvin Banks is available in the 31st pick of the draft? No. Would it be, is it the most, like, if that happens, would it be even the most surprising thing that happens in this draft? Probably not.
And just to highlight to other people too, because we often define a player by the exact spot in which they were drafted and say that's where they were drafted, right? I know there was at least one team. So Braden Fisk went at 39 in round 2. And if one other thing happened in the draft, Braden Fisk is going in like the 20s. Just saying. So just so you, like, if one team took one other player, Braden Fisk is probably going in the 20s. So, but he's picked 39 forever in eternity. He's picked 39 in the 2024 NFL draft, but he could have been picked 20-something, we'll say. Just so you know, right? So that stuff, the range in which players can actually come off the board is wide because all these boards, especially after the top, they just diverge. And so never say never. Remember, it was a surprise last year that Ricky Pearsall and Xavier Legette went in the first round. We didn't know where all of these receivers were going to go. We thought Ladd McConkey would be that guy at 31 or 30, 32 a bunch of the times. Well, Ladd had to go all the way at 34. We thought Keon Coleman, maybe. But we thought some of those receivers would go later in the second, maybe into the third, and they went in the first. So you just never really know. And what teams are doing right now is making sure that they are very prepared, that they are completely prepared. So Kansas City has to at least be prepared if Kelvin Banks was to fall, because that's the other thing. If Kelvin Banks is available at 18, Kansas City's now debating maybe, hey, we might need to trade up to go get him. We don't have many of these left tackle opportunities. Anyway, pick 32 was Walter Nolan, another guy that's talked about as a top 15 caliber pick that goes later. These things happen every year. And I think this would be a nice win for Philadelphia. I'm a Walter Nolan fan. And if you get him at 32 to directly replace Milton Williams right off the bat, that's going to feel pretty good, I think, if you're the Eagles.
Yeah, it would. And definitely you'd be getting a ton of these, how did the Eagles do it again? How he's done it again conversations if that happened. It is interesting, though, in that Nolan has one of the widest ranges of evaluations. Like, people are starting to talk about this a bit more. There are people out there that view Walter Nolan as a top 10 draft pick. There are also a significant number of people out there that view Walter Nolan as a second round draft pick. So more than almost any other of these first round guys, he seems to have a really broad range of projections for him.
Just because we've talked a lot about the off field with James Pierce and Mike Green a lot. T'Vondre Sweat was another guy that we thought was probably a second-round prospect, but had the DUI before the draft. I mean, he had enough that we were talking about him as well. The teams probably won't touch him before the third. He went early second round last year as well. He went at pick 38 to the Tennessee Titans, few picks into the second round. So we talk about the off-field stuff, but you just never know how much that's actually being weighed. And it always takes one team. It takes one team to take a player. So you don't know if they're going to completely fall or if one team's going to stop the slide, so to speak. So Sweat was kind of that guy last year, where I think we were surprised just because of all the off-field buzz heading into the draft.
Right.
So that's it, man. We went 3 hours last week because that was us.
Well, the other thing, so the last thing to talk about after that is the guys that fell out of this first round. So notable players that did not appear in this first round at all. Luther Burden, not in the first round at all. Tyler Booker, the big Alabama offensive guard that Renner loves, not in the first round. So some significant consensus first round guys did not appear at all in this mock.
Yeah, and Donovan Ezeraku from Boston College. I think he's the other guy that's rising on various boards, including PFF and Trevor's board. I think some other people really, really like Ezeraku, and I agree. I mean, I like Ezeraku. He's so much cleaner than some of the other guys from a football and off field and football. I don't know, playing. We'll just say people appreciate him off the field more than others. We'll say. So he might feel like a clean prospect to a lot. Like if Detroit's sitting there with the James Pierce Ezeraku discussion, they could have that legitimate, we could get a more consistent player, all around player in Ezeraku, probably fits the culture a little bit better based off reports, or we could try to hit this home run with James Pierce, try to pull the culture out of him, make him fit into our team. I could see that happening. I could see that discussion happening if you're the Detroit Lions. But Ezeraku, this is where we're Thursday into Friday saying Luther Burden, Tyler Booker, Ezeraku, they're still on the board. We got some pretty good football players still available here coming after Mel's mock.
Yeah, in terms of the consensus board, Tyler Booker is the highest ranked player that didn't go in the first round. He's 24th overall right now. Luther Burden is 31 overall. Ezeraku is 32 overall. And then Grace Abel is 34 overall. Those are all the highest ranked guys that didn't go in this first round.
Yeah, Zabel's another one. Like I think maybe Mel's late. Maybe Mel hates the small school guys.
Well, Zabel, so he's the next domino, right? The knock-on effect of Kelvin Banks going 31, like the teams that could have used interior offensive linemen. Tyler Booker, the same thing. The teams that could have used interior offensive linemen not going in that direction, and instead bringing in a Emanwari or a Jahdae Barron because he slid. Like those are the teams that have caused this slide of offensive linemen, causing Grace Abel not to go in the first round, causing Tyler Booker not to go in the first round, and Kelvin Banks to be available at 31 overall. So I think you're just seeing these dominoes, like the knock-on effect of really the start of it being Will Campbell not going 4 overall.
So there we have it, man. Mel Kiper's round 1 mock draft. Got to review it, see what the Godfather had to say. I always appreciate the work that Mel puts in to the draft. I love watching the old drafts and what Mel was thinking at the time. If I ever tweet that stuff out, it's not to call Mel out. It's just interesting to think, here's his top 5 running backs or his top 5 QBs at the time. Please don't hate on draft analysts if they were off on a player or two. Just have some perspective. Everybody seems to miss more often than not. It happens. It's all good. So this week, Sam, we've had some questions about us getting beyond the first round. So first off, we do like a second round mock?
So we should do, somebody was asking about that earlier. We should do a second round, 2-round mock. What I think we should do is the first 5 minutes should be simulate on the PFF mock draft, sim the first round, talk about that for 5-10 minutes.
And then draft the second.
And then draft the second round.
Yeah, I think that'd be great. I think I'd be good with that. You have to trust, let's get a good sim, right? Get a good sim, react to it, and then we do the second round mock. So we could do that next week. That could be the way we do it. We'll do a fan mock at some point. We'll let you do it, right? Put your money where your mouth is. Also, just a reminder, we got our studio being built. Appreciate everybody being here. We're working from home for the next few weeks. Studio is on its way. And I kind of unveiled it right now. Like, we're going to be live on draft night. It's just going to be us. Check the mic. Live on draft night. You can join us all of round 1, all of round 2. We're just going to be live. We're just going to have a hangout, and then we'll do a audio podcast right after that. So we're just going to go nonstop. But we're the show. We are our show on draft night. We hope that you'll join us. There's a lot of shows to choose from, Sam. So I hope you just put it on your calendar that you're with Check the Mic on draft night as your second, third, fourth screen, whatever screen you want to be. But just put it on and be with us. And you say, yeah, you should do that.
Yeah.
All right. All right. This week, we're going to do QB rankings and wide receiver rankings, God willing. Got a lot to get through here, but we're going to do our top 10s across both positions. We'll talk through it. We'll have more guests in the coming weeks. We'll try to have Chris Sims, his annual visit, Dane Brugler, his annual visit, JT O'Sullivan, his annual visit once he gets through more of the quarterback. So got a lot going on here. Hit the subscribe button and the thumbs up on your way out. It's a big month here. One more month to the draft here, Sam.
Has Chris Sims unveiled any more positions? His QB rankings were very tame.
I don't know. I mean, he's not going to like McMillan, right? So he'll have him at like 5th or something. But there's no one to like. Is there?
Well, yeah. What would the
didn't Zerline a couple years ago had like Jalen Hyatt as wide receiver 1? Was that right? Or did I make that up?
I don't remember that.
Or like much
I can
higher
imagine somebody falling in love with Burden.
Yeah, we need like Golden being high is kind of expected now. We need like the freak athlete receiver to surpass the technical guy of Tet McMillan. That's what you need to happen to have some aggressive takes here. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I mean, if Sims doesn't come up with some hot takes in the next few weeks, I might not want him on the show. You tell him, I'll DM him right now. I'll say, listen, Sims, you better be aggressive in your receiver takes here. And then when you drop they're probably coming out this week. Probably coming this week.
Yeah, I would think so. Because he's already started the QBs, obviously.
Receivers next. All right. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again on Wednesday with more Check the Mic. Thumbs up, subscribe, do it on the way out.